Alright, so today's Friday, June 24th, 2022. I'm here in El Paso, Texas, and I'm with Robert Flores. My name is Joshua Lopez, and we're conducting a follow-up interview on El Paso food history. Thanks for agreeing to meet with me again and to be interviewed. So could you please start with when and where you were born, a little bit about your family, and about your childhood growing up?
Okay, so my name is Robert Flores Jr. I was born here in El Paso, Texas. I grew up primarily in the Bel Air feeder pattern area, and my journey with food started at a very young age. My earliest memories was when I would watch my grandma, my mother's mom, cook in her kitchen, and even though I was very young and there was a little bit of a language barrier, her and I still managed to communicate through her cooking.
And so what are some memories or dishes that she prepared that you felt were special to that relationship with her?
So growing up with her, I remember that she would wake up before the crack of dawn to pray the rosary every morning. And after she was done with that, she would then proceed to the kitchen to start making her tamales that she would pass out to members of the family, neighbors, and other friends. And so that was something that always stood out to me, was her always doing that after her morning ritual.
And I might be misremembering, but in our prior interview, you also told a story of your grandmother and how she was known for her cooking at in her parish community. Is this the same grandma, or is that your father's mom?
No, that is the same grandma. My mom,
okay.
my mom's mom. Yes.
Could you tell us a little more about that, like your grandmother's relationship with her parish community?
Yes. So she was a devout Catholic, and many of her older brothers actually discerned and ended up becoming priests. And so she grew up with a strong faith in Catholicism, and she continued serving her community. She would walk to Mass, pray the rosary every morning, and any food that she would ever make, leftovers or an excess amount, she would take to share with the people there, or if she knew of another parishioner or another friend of the church who was under the weather, she would go and take them food so that they could have something to eat as well.
Do you have a memory in particular, a story of one person that she's fed while they were sick, or maybe stories you've heard about her through other people?
Again, so this all happened when I was very, very young, and it's more of what has been told to me when I have been older. But to my understanding, one of my grandma's neighbors in the home where she lived with my grandpa, the neighbor wasn't as welcoming and as loving as she was, and even though my grandma was always faced with this resistance, and she was always still very, very loving and compassionate towards them. And the woman who lived next door, her husband actually came down with a terminal illness. And so every day she would prepare them food, warm it up for them, take it to them on a daily basis. And I think that's how that relationship kind of began. Because to my understanding, this neighbor was very cold, would give my grandma the cold shoulder, and wasn't very nice. And my grandma consistently always prayed for her and tried, and when that instance had occurred, it kind of just turned the page in a new chapter. And I remember hearing this story when she had passed away. The neighbor, the wife, had a conversation with my mom and my aunts and uncles, and she said that she was very upset and angry with herself because my grandma lived next door to her for so long, and she didn't take advantage of her friendship until the end of her life.
Um, how would you say that affected your relationship with food, or if it even did, or um, the way that you see food?
So I think from what I took away from that was there might be times where I'm able to provide for others who may not necessarily be able to provide for themselves. And it kind of goes back to a prayer that someone from my parish has taught me, and it's this is the English translation, where it's give bread to those who are hungry and hunger to those who have bread. So if we're able to feed ourselves physically, then we also need to feed ourselves spiritually. And once we're able to do that, then we then need to go back and help those who aren't able to feed themselves physically. And so I think that's kind of what I've taken away from my memories of her and how she served others in her community.
So growing up, how did your relationship with food change?
My earliest memories after that, I remember that I didn't really understand why the women were always in the kitchen, and once whatever meal was ready, then they would have to then serve the men. And so I kind of always had that in the back of my mind where, we should all be in service to each other. And so I saw a lot of that in my upbringing, where it was more of the women of the household, the older women, siblings, taking care more of the males in the family, on both sides of my family, both my mom and my dad. And so I think growing up, it's, we need to take more care of each other. It doesn't matter what gender we are, male, female, or how we identify.
And what were some of the foods that you remember eating growing up?
Tamales were a big tradition in my family, and though I didn't necessarily take part in that experience with making them, I remember my family would gather on holidays to help with that. And again, any excess or extra food they would have, they would go around and give it to people who needed it.
Another thing we talked about in your last interview was you called them your church family, and I was wondering if you can give a little history of your relationship with that. How did it come to be, and what are some food memories that you have with them?
So when I had referred to my church family, this stems all the way back to when I was a senior in high school, 18 years old. It must have been maybe in the month of January and February. And I remember getting a call from a friend of ours, Johnny Badigan, on a Friday evening. And around that time, I was very skeptical about answering phone calls who I did not recognize the number. And there was just something that spoke to me that said I needed to pick up this one phone call in particular, even though I didn't recognize that number. And so sure enough, I went ahead and picked up the phone. It was Johnny on the other end, and he was extending the invitation for me to serve on that men's Acts retreat that upcoming summer. And so that kind of stems, or that is actually the beginning of where I started developing my relationship with my church family. We had gone through formation, served on the retreat, and since then we would participate in attending different events that the church would provide. For example, the bazaar season, the El Paso bazaars, or the kermeses. We would have ours at St. Pius, and we would all volunteer. Then we would all partake in the St. Anthony one, and we would just go about every weekend seeing which parish was having or hosting their kermes. And around the holiday seasons, in Advent, we would all gather at Johnny and Maria's house to help make tamales for ourselves, friends, and other people who needed things. So I remember that's another. I remember that's something else that we also participated in, was gathering and all of us making tamales together.
And so how would you at present describe your relationship to food?
So I think with my relationship with food now, I'm a little bit more cognizant of what it is I put inside my body, even more so now, because now that I've started my career, I've started paying for my own health insurance, and now that I have this opportunity, I've taken myself to the doctor, and I'm aware of where my health is at, and so I'm very cognizant of what it is I eat, because there is there are things that run in my family that I need to be aware of, and I need to invest in my health now. And so, whereas before I had a really strong sweet tooth, and I can eat a whole bag of jelly beans by myself in one sitting, but I'm more aware of things that I should not be eating, just because I know I need to invest in my health, and especially with what runs in my family.
So I was wondering if you can talk a little bit about your marriage, and I guess thinking about what you mentioned right now about health foods. How does that work now? Like, now you're taking care of your health, what kinds of dishes do you prepare, and how do you all share that responsibility?
So my partner and I have been married for a couple of months, but it's almost been 5 years that we've been together. And during the school year, when I am having to, take my work with me home and still work into the night until I am finished and preparing for the next day, he's primarily responsible for making our dinner, whereas on my end, my responsibility is to clean up the kitchen. Some of the things that he does prepare for us is various different types of chicken recipes. I mean, we do lots of things with chicken. I think our latest creation in recent time has been chicken pizza, which is basically chicken breast that has been seasoned, put in the air fryer, and then we put marinara sauce on top with a little bit of mozzarella cheese. And so that's probably the one that sticks out most, just because it's the most recent. But he's definitely more of the cook in the household, and I'm more of the cleaner, just because of time, I guess. And
I was wondering if you could elaborate more on the story you told of the first Thanksgiving you all hosted in your home.
So in this past November, we had the opportunity to have our families over for Thanksgiving, and it was the first Thanksgiving we had in our new home. And so my mom actually had come a couple days before, and we sat down, we created a plan, a grocery list. We organized that grocery list by the different sections of the grocery store. This is what we need to get from the produce and the different aisles. And her and I started prepping the food the day before on that Wednesday, and come Thanksgiving Day, we again met at our house. She met us very early, and we started cooking in the kitchen, and it was a very tiring experience, I would say. I know personally I took it for granted growing up, not knowing how much time, effort, and energy went into preparing that meal. But it was very nice to have everyone over and partake in that meal, knowing that it was our first Thanksgiving that we were having in that new home together as a couple.
What were some of the things that you remember, like, happening in the kitchen? Maybe some of the things that felt tiring, like you described, or maybe some things that were a bit exciting for you?
Maybe not so much tiring, but maybe more of the excitement part of it was I can start a task and my mom can just pick up and finish it, and then I can pick up a task that she was starting, and we were just kind of like working hand in hand, kind of like a machine where, you know, I was able to start something, then she can pick it up. And I'll give you an example where she had prepared the turkey to go into the oven, and as that turkey was roasting, I was able to, baste it every now and then and monitor the temperature and making sure that it was okay in the oven and nothing had exploded. And so it was just her and I working hand in hand and enjoying that experience together.
Were the Thanksgiving recipes passed down to you from her, or were there some that you found from other sources?
So the majority of them were ones that had been kept in the family, and one of the newer ones that we had made was sweet potato fluff, which is basically yams with marshmallow sauce, brown sugar, cinnamon, and lots and lots of like melted butter, and it's really good. And so that's one of the newer recipes that we now make in our Thanksgiving tradition.
How did that come about?
So that one was actually given to us by my sister's boyfriend. He's from Crisfield, Maryland, and that's something that they always prepare with his family when they celebrate the holidays. And so when he had made it for our family, the first time we were just thrown back by how delicious it was, because on its own it could be a dessert. And since then, we've been incorporating it every year into our Thanksgiving meal.
After everything was over, how did you feel about your first Thanksgiving at your house?
I was really happy. We had a lot of leftovers, a lot of food to share, and even though it took lots of time and effort, I think it's just something that we are going to want to continue doing every year from now, is hosting Thanksgiving, just because it gives us an opportunity to have our families over and we all partake in that one meal together.
So what do you think food, or what does food mean to you, and what should food mean to all of us?
So food is a way to nourish our bodies, give ourselves energy. And I think what it means to me, the backbone, is kind of what I've learned from that prayer that I spoke about earlier. We need to feed those who are hungry by giving them bread, by providing them with food, resources. But we also need to feed ourselves spiritually. And so if there's anything that I've learned from my experience with food, with my experiences with my church family and my upbringing, it's that. It's give bread to those who are hungry and hunger to those who have bread. Making sure that we're fed in all aspects of our lives.
I'm actually just remembering, just at the beginning of the interview, you commented on how you noticed as a kid how divided the kitchen was and the labor was. I was wondering if you have thought about that since, and how does that play a role in your life today in the way that you've created your home and family?
Well, witnessing that firsthand in my upbringing, on both sides of my family, my mom and my dad's, and being in a same-sex marriage, I think, there comes opportunities where it's not all the women in the kitchen who are preparing a lavish meal. It's, my mom, myself, my husband, who are preparing this meal for everyone in the family to enjoy. And maybe it is because of that, because I am in a same-sex marriage where it is my husband and I who have to prepare meals for ourselves. It's not, a husband and a wife where the woman's in the kitchen and the husband sitting down. And so I think maybe because of that, I don't see that so much now as I did in my upbringing.
Is that something that you take pleasure in? Is the act of sharing responsibility and caring for one another?
Most definitely. In our household, we divide up the responsibilities and what it is we have to do so that, it runs smoothly and during the school year when I'm very focused on work and having to bring my work with me, he does do the primarily of the cooking and I do most of the cleaning, but in times like these where I'm off for summer vacation, I'm the one who's doing the majority of the cooking and he's doing the majority of the cleaning, and so it's just a give and take in the household.
Is there anything that I didn't ask you that you'd like to talk about?